Hello there, my wonderful and loyal audience. Sorry I haven't uploaded in a while. It's been, kind of busy with, creative burnout and depression and stuff. You know how it is. Say, do you like airplanes? Mysteries? Coconut crabs? Then you're going to love today's story, because today we're going to talk about Amelia Earhart's last journey. So strap in, get your most dashing scarf, and let's get devoured by wildlife together as I, a private pilot who isn't even done with instrument training yet, fiercely criticize one of history's greatest aviators from the safety of a Badger PNG and 86 years of hindsight. Now, the disappearance is obviously the part of Earhart's story that captivates us the most, but before we dig into that, we need to start with the lead up to it. Amelia Earhart was born in Kansas, but discovered her love of flying during a $10 flight in a biplane in Long Beach, California. By the time she was 100 or so feet in the air, she knew that she had to fly. She quickly found herself one of the few female flight instructors of the time. By 1922, she'd set the altitude record for women aviators, and by 1923, she'd become the 16th licensed female pilot in the United States. She had to give up aviation for a couple years to work odd jobs, but quickly found her way back into the cockpit. In 1928, she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by airplane. However, during this flight, she had to take a second pilot along, Wilmer Stultz, because most of the flying had to be done by reference to instruments, a style of flying that Earhart hadn't been trained in. She lamented that she didn't get to do a whole lot of the flying herself, and that she wished to try the transatlantic crossing again on her own. Not satisfied with the circumstances of her transatlantic crossing, she set out to build an entirely independent reputation. She became the first woman to fly solo across the North American continent and back, which, as a pilot myself, I can safely say is no small feat, especially when you need to cross the Rockies. Imagine doing it with awful weather prediction and low-power, unreliable engines. She then took up air racing, set the world altitude record for both men and women at 18,415 feet, and finally accomplished that transatlantic solo she wanted in 1932. But by 1936, Earhart had decided that these achievements weren't enough. She wanted to accomplish a circumnavigation of the entire globe. Now, this had been done by airplane before, but previous attempts at this stuck to the higher latitudes. Earhart wanted to do something far more perilous, a true circumnavigation, done as close to the equator as she could get away with. This would make the whole ordeal far more impressive and far more challenging in several ways. First, going by the equator would make the trip severely longer. The first circumnavigation ever completed took these northern latitudes we mentioned earlier, which spanned a distance of 27,500 miles, more or less. Impressive to be sure, but Earhart's equator route would have added an additional 1,500 miles, for a total of approximately 29,000 miles. In addition, this kind of route would spend a much larger chunk of her time over the Pacific Ocean, flying with zero ground reference and little room for navigational error. To combat this navigational challenge, a couple changes would have to be made to her normal flying style, and this is where you, good viewer, need to pay attention. First, she'd need a change of aircraft. Previously, Earhart had flown the Lockheed Vega, and it had been fine for transatlantic and transcontinental crossings, but the Pacific Ocean was a whole different beast entirely. It'd take far more fuel to make it, fuel that the Vega simply wasn't able to fit no matter how you sliced it. Lockheed Martin, hoping to get some good publicity out of Earhart's expedition, gifted her a new airplane, the twin-engine Lockheed Model 10 Electra, fitted with a radio compass and extra fuel tanks. Unfortunately for her, the Lockheed Electra would become the source of a lot of this expedition's problems. Now, an airplane being the source of all a pilot's problems is nothing new. One only need take a look at my bank account to see that. But the Model 10 Electra presented a series of damning technical challenges. An Electra complex, if you will. Wait, hold on. Was that Sigmund Freud already used the term Electra complex? It's used to describe a weird hypothetical psychosexual fixation that women have for their fathers in theory? And that I should be saying any of this out loud because I'm making myself look like an absolute freak?
It's not weird to read Freud. It's only weird to uncritically agree with...
Don't worry about him. He's with the coconut crabs now. The first problem in this Electra complex are the twin engines. Now, that alone isn't a problem. The twin engine makes sense for the sake of redundancy, especially when crossing thousands of miles of open water, but twin engines are an entirely different beast to fly. So far, Earhart had mainly flown the Kinner Airster, the Lockheed Vega, and the Pitcairn Autogyro. Notice how all of these are single-engine airplanes, and one of them isn't even technically a fixed-wing aircraft. This wouldn't be the thing that killed her over the Pacific, but it had caused the first problem in a long chain of mishaps. Initially, Earhart's plan was to fly her route east to west, She took off out of Long Beach and landed in Honolulu, Hawaii with 3 crew members: herself, navigator Fred Noonan, and radio operator Harry Manning. However, when she tried to take off again for the second leg of the journey, something bad happened. And this is where that lack of multi-engine experience likely became a factor. She lined up with the runway, pushed both throttles forward, and noticed that the plane aimed slightly to the right. This isn't unusual for takeoff, and it could be corrected with some left rudder, but this isn't what Earhart chose to do. Instead, she throttled back the left engine. Hard. Too hard. And this caused the aircraft to swerve out of control. Tailwheel configured aircraft like this exaggerate any kind of rudder deviation on the ground, so this attempt to use engine instead of rudder sent the aircraft off balance and into what's called a ground loop, slamming the left wing on the ground, snapping off the landing gear, destroying both engines, and sending the plane skidding down the runway. Nobody got hurt, but that experienced radio operator, Harry Manning, lost confidence in Earhart as a pilot and left the expedition. Which is a real conundrum because it brings us to the second problem of the Electra complex. Lockheed Martin fitted Earhart's Model 10 Electra with a very new radio navigation technology called the radio compass. It's that little hoop on the top of the airplane. At the time, the radio compass required very serious radio training to become proficient. Radio training that neither Earhart nor Noonan had. Both crew members famously had a very poor grasp of Morse code. Earhart's friend and celestial navigation pioneer, Lieutenant Commander Philip Weems, offered to pay for her to study celestial navigation and radio operation under the tutelage of Britain's top female pilot, but Earhart declined this offer. This was likely because of some insider baseball in the aviation field at the time. Most aviation radio operators in the military were seen as lesser, as pilot washouts, so Earhart and Noonan likely didn't want to bite off on that training for reasons of public perception. In addition, Earhart likely didn't want to waste any time hiring a new radio operator. The Second World War was looming on the horizon, and if the fascistic ravings of her Nazi collaborator colleague, Charles Lindbergh, were anything to go by, she didn't have much time to get this done. The decision to continue without radio expertise would get her killed. By the time Earhart had fixed the plane back up, the prevailing global winds had changed direction, and the circumnavigation would have to be made in the opposite direction. So, Earhart and Noonan restarted their journey from Honolulu, going all the way around the world along this route until she made it to Papua New Guinea. This would be the last place that anyone ever saw Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan alive. When the crew took off for Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean, they had made an agreement with the US Coast Guard to station a cutter just offshore of the destination so they could communicate, and the US Coast Guard could use the radio compass on board the Electra to send course corrections. Earlier, Amelia had tested her radio compass in Papua New Guinea, but she couldn't get any bearing information and decided to chalk it up as being too close to the radio station. She also decided at the last minute to ditch her Morse code switch and rely on voice transmission instead. A grave mistake, considering that, at the time, aviation voice transmission was far less reliable than Morse code. On the way to the island, Earhart and Noonan used pilotage and celestial navigation in an attempt to get within radio range of the Coast Guard. But this is where the third problem in the Electra complex comes in. The Lockheed Model 10 Electra didn't have any topside bubble to take celestial measurements with a sextant. Celestial measurements are already unreliable as it is. The flight that day was heavily affected by low-level clouds, and celestial navigation doesn't account for potential winds blowing the plane off course. But not having any kind of roof bubble makes that job just a little bit harder, and it also makes any measurements potentially subject to light refraction through sloped glass, a compounding factor in an already somewhat unreliable navigation method. It was enough to get them within radio range of the Coast Guard, but this is where their lack of radio experience and Earhart's choice to ditch the Morse code switch came back to bite the crew in the ass. We don't know for certain if it was a radio operator error or busted equipment, but either way, Earhart could transmit, but she couldn't receive signals herself. She called the Coast Guard multiple times, and each time the Coast Guard responded with course corrections for her. But each time, those transmissions went unanswered, as if Earhart's crew didn't actually get them. At one point, when Noonan had predicted they were close to the island, Earhart dipped down to 1,000 feet in an attempt to see the island, and made one more transmission as she did. The Coast Guard reported that it was the strongest signal they'd heard from her all day, and the crew all rushed out the deck to catch a glimpse of Earhart's plane, but that glimpse never came. Earhart couldn't find Howland Island, so she transmitted that she was turning to the southeast, assuming they'd overshot to the north. That was her last transmission. A frantic search quickly began to find any kind of wreckage or flotsam from Earhart's plane. And I'm sure you're thinking that this is where our knowledge ends. The fate of Earhart is a mystery, right? Well, just about 400 miles southeast of Howland Island, right along the last reported heading of Amelia Earhart, and bang on the remaining distance she could have made it based on her fuel reserves, lies another bit of land, Nikomororo Island. And not 3 years later, a British expedition there found quite a few interesting things. They found evidence of a campsite. They found 13 human bones, including a skull that had been picked clean by, say it with me, coconut crabs. They found a bottle of Benedictine herbal liquor, a brand known to be a favorite of Earhart. They found a man's shoe. They found a woman's shoe. They found 2 US Navy sextants designed for aerial navigation. And most importantly, the bones looked to be small enough to belong to a woman of Earhart's proportions. So the team, acutely aware that they had likely found Earhart, rushed the bones into the care of one British doctor by the name of Dr. D.W. Hoodless. Now, wiggle room where it's due. By 1940, the science of bone measurement hadn't even fully escaped its origins in measuring skulls to come to racist conclusions. So yeah, there was bound to be inaccuracies here and there. But Dr. Hoodless, well, he just kinda lazily took some measurements, had a long drag of his cigarette, shrugged and said, "Here, mate, bones look dainty enough." And that was that. The bones were discarded and the artifacts were abandoned, and the only thing remaining of them to this day are the measurements that Dr. Hoodless took. Oh, by the way, none of this is mentioning that just a couple years ago, the University of Tennessee Anthropology Department, one of the world's most renowned universities in the field of skeletal analysis, reanalyzed Dr. Hoodless's measurements and found that, yes, these bones would have been a 99% match with someone of Amelia Earhart's stature. So, while you can claim all you want that this is still just a theory,
a game theory,
I'm going to choose to present and believe Nicomaroro Island to be the final resting place of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Oh my god. Read the fucking room effects, guy! Now, I don't want to diminish Earhart's accomplishments. Saying that one of the world's most accomplished women ever to fly died to her own arrogance is a statement that sounds very bad in a vacuum. Trust me, I fucking wish it was Charles Lindbergh who ended up on that island getting turned into Krabby Patties. But as a pilot myself, I know damn well the importance of humility and keeping ego out of aeronautical decision making. And the simple fact of the matter is that Earhart failed her duties as a pilot in command. She didn't take the time to learn the intricacies of a multi-engine aircraft. She got impatient and failed to take the necessary time to find a new radio operator. She failed to take additional radio training for free. She failed to cancel the leg from New Guinea to Howland Island when she tested her radio compass. She failed to keep at least the Morse code equipment on board her airplane. And in the end, all of those things got not only her, but her navigator killed. You can be a pioneer and a legend all you want, but at the end of the day, if the conditions aren't right, a pilot's duty is to not fly. Amelia Earhart failed that duty. Plain and simple. I've been trying to chip away at my IFR license, and I haven't flown in about a month now, because the crosswinds in my part of Tennessee have been out of limits for the past 3 weekends I've scheduled the lesson. I'm incredibly fucking frustrated by that. I understand how Earhart must have felt, but still, I soldier on, staying on the ground when the conditions aren't safe to fly, because the old aviation axiom always stands. It's far better to be down here wishing you were up there than up there wishing you were down here. If you're a returning subscriber of mine, thank you for sticking with me. I know I deleted some of my old videos and I haven't uploaded in a while. I wasn't proud of the severe cynicism in my news videos, and I'm looking to try to improve my bad outlook and political smarts so I can report the news in a more responsible way. If you've stuck with me for this long, I deeply appreciate you, and please stick around for more history content. You've been wonderful. I've been Pip. Thanks for watching.
Saw was the price tag on them.